On the distant planet called Vorlax 9, thick jungles stretched for endless miles. Giant trees rose like green towers and strange glowing insects floated in the air. It was a world full of life but also full of danger. Every creature on this planet feared one name, the Gorvath. It was the biggest and most dangerous beast known here, a creature with black scales as strong as armor and eyes that shone red in the dark. Even soldiers in armored vehicles stayed away from its hunting grounds. To see a Gorvath was almost a death sentence. Dr. Elira had studied these creatures for years. She was not human. Her skin was pale blue, her eyes large and bright like crystals. As a scientist, she always believed in facts and evidence. Fear was something she left for others. Yet even she felt uneasy whenever she heard the echoing roar of a Gorvath in the distance. Her job was to observe and record, not to fight. One morning, alarms sounded across the research base. The control room filled with worried voices and flashing lights. A small ship had crashed somewhere deep in the jungle. It was not one of theirs, it was from another world. When the scanners read the signal, the officers gasped. The survivor was a human. Elira had heard of humans before. They were new to this part of the galaxy. Small, fragile-looking creatures that breathed oxygen and built metal machines to protect themselves. To most species, humans were curious but unremarkable. They were seen as soft, emotional, and reckless. No one believed they could survive on a planet like Vorlax 9. Still, the rules were clear. All life must be rescued when possible. Elira joined the search team that day, wearing her protective suit and carrying her scanner. The mission commander warned them. The crash site is in the Gorvath territory. We go in fast, we get the human out, and we get back alive. They traveled in a hover transport through the jungle canopy. The smell of wet soil and giant flowers filled the air. Huge leaves brushed against the sides of their craft as they moved deeper and deeper into the wild zone. Every sound made the soldiers tense. The crack of a branch, the rustle of ferns, the low growl of something watching from the shadows. Elira watched her scanner. The human's life signs were faint but steady. He was alive. "He's moving," she whispered. But he's not running. That confused her. On a world filled with predators, why would any living being not run? After 2 hours, they reached the crash site. The ship was half buried in mud, smoke rising from the torn metal. It looked like it had been hit by lightning or maybe attacked in the air. They expected to find the human inside, injured or hiding. But the cockpit was empty. Then they saw something strange. The ground nearby was burned. Pieces of black scales were scattered around like armor plates from a creature. There were claw marks in the soil, deep and wide, as if 2 titans had fought there. The marks led away from the wreck. What in the stars happened here? One soldier muttered. Elira knelt beside one of the scales and touched it carefully. "This belongs to a Gorvath," she said. "A young one, but still. Nothing could kill it with bare hands." Her mind refused to believe what the evidence suggested. Had the human been attacked? If so, where was his body? The air smelled odd, like smoke and cooked meat. She looked around and her scanner beeped again. "The human's heartbeat, it's stronger now," she said softly. "He's alive. 200 meters north." They moved quietly through the thick forest, their boots sinking into the soft ground. The smell of smoke grew stronger. Birds flew from the treetops in alarm. Elira heard something else too. Faint humming. A voice, someone was singing. The team froze. Singing out here? It was a calm, almost cheerful sound. Elira's heart pounded. She pushed through the vines and saw an open clearing ahead. She stepped out and stopped breathing for a moment. In the middle of the clearing, a human man sat beside a fire. His clothes were torn and burned, his face covered with dirt, but his eyes were calm. He was cooking something on a metal stick. Smoke curled lazily into the air. Around him lay pieces of dark, scaly flesh. At first, Elira didn't understand what she was seeing. Then her translator drone identified the remains on the ground. It spoke softly. "Organic sample detected. Species Gorvath." The words made her entire team freeze. The human looked up at them, surprised but not frightened. He smiled. "Oh, hey," he said, his voice rough but friendly. "You folks hungry?" Elira stared at him. Her brain refused to process what her eyes were seeing. The Gorvath, the untouchable predator, the top of the food chain, was dead, cooked, and this human was calmly eating it like it was an evening meal. Her team whispered in disbelief. One soldier muttered, "This can't be real. Nothing kills a Gorvath alone." The human shrugged, poking the fire with a stick. "Guess nobody told it that." Elira took a step closer. "You killed it?" she asked. He nodded casually. It tried to make me dinner. I returned the favor. No one spoke for a long time. Even the jungle seemed quiet. Elira's scientific mind tried to analyze it. How had he done it? There were burn marks, likely from his ship's thrusters, and a few improvised weapons made from broken metal panels. Still, it was beyond logic. This man had not only survived the Gorvath's attack, he had defeated it and was now feasting on it. She looked at his eyes again. They were tired but full of something she didn't often see in her own people. Defiance. He didn't just survive, he refused to die. The commander whispered, "We need to take him back to base. Command will want to know how this happened." The human nodded, finishing the last bite of meat before standing. "Fine by me. But bring a container. This stuff's too good to waste." Elira almost laughed in disbelief. On her planet, no one would even touch Gorvath flesh. It was considered sacred, even poisonous. But here was this human, calm as ever, treating it like a simple campfire meal. As they began their journey back, Elira walked beside him. She kept glancing at the half-eaten Gorvath meat in his bag, then at the fire still burning behind them. The scene felt like a dream, something that broke the very rules of nature. That night, as their hovercraft lifted above the jungle, Elira looked down and saw the fading glow of the fire in the darkness. The human sat quietly beside her, staring out the window. He didn't seem to understand how extraordinary his act was. In her field notes, Elira wrote one simple line before the lights of the base appeared in the distance. "Today, I saw a fragile creature eat fear itself, and she knew deep in her heart that her understanding of humans and perhaps the universe had just changed forever." The next morning on Vorlax 9, the jungle was quiet, but inside the alien base, the atmosphere buzzed with shock and excitement. News spread faster than wildfire. A human had killed and eaten a Gorvath, the most feared predator on the planet. For generations, even the bravest alien soldiers had avoided that beast. But this strange human had done it alone, and was now calmly drinking tea as if nothing had happened. Dr. Elira walked down the corridor holding her research tablet. She could hear voices through the glass walls. Everyone wanted to see the human. Scientists, military officers, and even the medical team were crowding around the observation room. She entered quietly, but her heart was still full of questions. Inside the room, Captain Daniel Rourke sat on a metal chair, relaxed, his clothes still torn and stained from the jungle. He looked tired but peaceful. His eyes moved slowly around the room as if studying everything. The machines, the lights, even the faces staring at him. On the table before him sat a small metal container, the one he had used to carry the cooked Gorvath meat. The commander began the questioning. "Human, identify yourself and explain your actions." Daniel took a sip from the cup of warm liquid they had given him. "Captain Daniel Rourke, explorer from Earth. As for my actions, I was hungry," he said with a grin. The aliens exchanged looks of confusion. Elira tried not to smile. To them, it was not only shocking, it was impossible. To kill a Gorvath meant challenging the top of the food chain. To eat it was beyond logic. The commander pressed further. "Do you understand that the Gorvath is an apex predator? No one survives its attack." Daniel leaned back. "Guess I'm no one then." The room went silent again. Elira's translator drone buzzed faintly, struggling to interpret the tone, humor mixed with calm confidence. She studied his hands. They were rough, covered with small burns and cuts, but steady. This was not a man full of fear. This was a man who looked at danger and treated it as part of life. Later that day, Elira was assigned to document everything he said. She sat across from him in the lab while he explained what had happened. He told her how his ship had gone down during a survey mission. He had no weapons, only survival tools. When the Gorvath attacked, he used parts of the wreckage to make fire and heat. "They don't like flame," he said simply. "Most predators don't. I just gave it a reason to run, and when it didn't, I gave it something else to think about." Elira listened closely, typing notes. "You made fire." "With the wreckage?" He nodded. "We humans learned that early. Fire is our oldest friend." She looked at him with a mix of awe and curiosity. Fire was primitive technology for her people, something they barely used anymore. Yet this human treated it like a living companion, something to trust in the darkest places. When he spoke, he didn't sound proud or arrogant. He sounded practical, almost casual. "Out there," he said, pointing toward the jungle, "everything's trying to eat something. You just gotta make sure you're the one who eats last. Elira froze at those words. They were simple, but they carried a strange kind of strength. She could feel it in her chest. Humans didn't see fear the same way other species did. They faced it, played with it, sometimes even laughed at it. Later, Daniel asked for something strange. Can I see the creature's remains? The commander hesitated, but allowed Elira to take him to the lab. When they arrived, the Gorvath's huge skull rested on a metal platform, its jaws open wide, teeth as long as her arm. Most aliens wouldn't go near it even when dead. Daniel walked right up to it and touched one of the scales. Beautiful creature, he murmured softly. Too bad it didn't run. Elira was surprised. You respect it? Of course, he said. It was just doing what nature told it to. Survival's not evil. It's just life. That line stayed in her head for the rest of the day. For all their advanced machines and intelligence, her species had forgotten that truth long ago. They studied life from afar, avoiding risk, hiding behind shields. But this man, this fragile-looking human, had walked into the jaws of death and still found beauty in it. In the following days, Elira's curiosity grew stronger. She began spending more time with Daniel. He told her stories about Earth, a place with oceans, mountains, deserts, and animals far smaller than the Gorvath, but just as fierce. Lions, wolves, crocodiles, creatures that hunted humans long ago. Did you kill them all? She asked one night as they shared a meal. He smiled. No, we learned to live beside them. We learned how they think. You survive longer when you understand your enemies. Elira nodded slowly. She realized that this man didn't act like a soldier or a conqueror. He was something else, an explorer, a thinker, a survivor. And above all, he carried something that didn't fit into her science books. Instinct. One evening, Elira showed Daniel the data logs from the jungle. The Gorvath that attacked you was nearly 5 meters tall, she said. You shouldn't have been able to injure it. Daniel chuckled. Guess someone forgot to tell it that humans are fragile. Elira smiled for the first time in weeks. She noticed that every time she doubted him, he answered not with argument but with humor. He didn't fight her disbelief. He let it fade naturally. Later that night, Elira sat alone in her lab. The glowing jungle stretched beyond the windows, full of strange lights and sounds. She replayed the video of Daniel by the fire, roasting the Gorvath meat. The way he moved, calm and sure, fascinated her. She wrote in her notes, "The human male shows no sign of fear even when surrounded by danger. His behavior is guided not by logic but by confidence. Fear does not stop him, it teaches him." As she finished typing, a soft alarm beeped. The base sensors detected movement in the jungle again. Elira looked up, her eyes widening. The readings were clear. Another Gorvath, and it was heading toward the camp. The soldiers prepared quickly, raising shields and setting traps. The commander ordered Daniel to stay inside, but he only smiled and said, "You'll need more than walls." He stepped outside into the glowing night, Elira following close behind. The jungle rustled and a deep growl rolled through the air like thunder. Daniel knelt, studying the ground. "It's hunting," he said quietly. "But it's not hungry. It's angry." Elira's pulse raced. "How can you tell?" "Because I would be too," he said softly. Moments later, the massive beast appeared at the edge of the trees, its red eyes burning. Soldiers raised their weapons, but Daniel lifted his hand. "Wait." He picked up a torch from the wall and lit it. The Gorvath froze, growling low. Daniel's voice stayed calm. "You want revenge, don't you? But you should have learned from your friend." The creature roared and charged. The base lights flickered. Firelight flashed across Daniel's face as he threw the torch in front of it. The beast stopped just short of the flames, hissing in pain. "Fire, Elira!" he shouted. "More fire!" She ran to the control panel and activated the perimeter burners. A ring of flame surrounded the camp, keeping the creature at bay. Slowly, it backed into the shadows and disappeared into the jungle. When silence returned, Daniel smiled faintly. "Told you. They hate fire." Elira could barely speak. "You saved us," he looked at her calmly. "No, I reminded it who the real predator is." That night, long after everyone had gone to rest, Elira couldn't sleep. She sat at her desk listening to the soft hum of the jungle beyond the walls. Her mind kept replaying the moment Daniel faced the Gorvath. No armor, no shield, just fire and courage. For the first time, she felt something more than scientific curiosity. She felt respect. And deep inside her, a quiet realization formed. This human was not just surviving this world, He was teaching it that fear could be burned away. Elira looked up at the stars and whispered to herself, maybe humanity isn't fragile after all. Maybe they're what happens when fear learns how to fight back. Days passed after the Gorvath attack on the base, but Dr. Elira couldn't forget the sight of Captain Daniel Rourke standing in front of that roaring beast, calm and unshaken. The memory played in her mind every night. How could a fragile creature from a faraway planet face death without fear? There was something about humans that her science could not measure. Inside the research base, life slowly returned to normal. The soldiers repaired damaged walls. The scientists cleaned their instruments and reports were sent to the high command. But everyone's conversations eventually turned back to one subject, the human who ate the predator. Some called him a miracle. Others thought he was just lucky. A few whispered that he was dangerous. Elira didn't agree with any of those. She believed Daniel was different, and she wanted to understand why. That morning, she found him outside the base, sitting on a metal crate near the forest edge. He was repairing a small device from his broken shuttle, his hands steady and sure. The early sun reflected off the wet leaves and the air smelled fresh after the night rain. "You should rest," she said softly, approaching him. "You've already done more than anyone expected." He looked up, smiling faintly. "Rest comes later. Machines don't fix themselves." She tilted her head curiously. "You always work even when no one asks you to. Why?" Daniel paused, looking toward the horizon. "Because I've learned that doing something keeps the mind sharp. Back home, my grandfather used to say, when you stop moving, life moves on without you." Elira noted that in her mind. Humans had this strange wisdom hidden inside simple words. She sat beside him, watching him work. "You said you learned survival skills on your world. Were there creatures like the Gorvath there?" He chuckled. "Not quite that big. But we had enough. Sharks in the ocean, bears in the forest, wolves in the snow, you name it. Were you afraid of them?" He shrugged. "Of course. Everyone's afraid sometimes. The trick is not to let fear make your choices for you." That sentence struck her deeply. She had spent her life studying fear, animal behavior, flight responses, chemical reactions, but she had never thought of fear as something you could control. A few days later, she requested permission to accompany Daniel into the jungle for field research. The commander hesitated but agreed, on the condition that a small defense team followed them at a distance. Daniel didn't seem worried. "Don't worry, Doc," he said, adjusting his pack. "We're just taking a walk." The jungle was alive with color and sound. Giant ferns brushed against their legs and blue birds with glass-like wings flew overhead. Strange plants whispered as they passed. Daniel moved easily through the terrain, reading signs the way others read books. "Look here," he said, pointing to the ground. "Fresh tracks. Big ones, but not Gorvath. Herbivore. Probably harmless." Elira scanned with her device and confirmed. "How did you know?" He smiled. "The footprints round her. Predators have longer toes and they need traction to run." She realized he was seeing things without the help of technology. He trusted his instincts, something her people had lost long ago. She followed him quietly, recording every detail. Hours later, they reached a small clearing where the river curved around a hill. Daniel stopped and looked around. "Perfect spot," he said. "We'll rest here." Elira sat on a rock watching him gather dry branches. "You're going to make fire again?" "Of course," he said, grinning. "Fire keeps the bugs and beasts away. And besides, it makes everything feel like home." She watched as he struck metal against stone. Sparks danced, and soon a small flame flickered to life. It grew quickly, the warm light painting golden reflections on their faces. Elira felt a strange peace watching the fire. "Your kind really depends on this," she said softly. "Fire built us," he replied simply. "Before we had cities or machines, we had this. It taught us warmth, safety, and courage. Every human owes something to fire." The simplicity of his words moved her. She stared at the flames, wondering how something so small could hold so much meaning. After a while, Daniel took out some dried food from his pack and handed her a piece. "Try it. It's made from plants on my ship. Not as good as Gorvath steak, but it'll do." She hesitated, then smiled faintly. "You still joke about that?" "Why not?" he said, laughing. "You have to laugh at the things that try to eat you. It makes them smaller." That was another strange human idea, she thought, turning fear into humor. Suddenly, the jungle grew quiet. Even the birds stopped singing. Daniel's eyes sharpened. He raised his hand silently, signaling her to stay still. A deep vibration passed through the ground, followed by a low growl. Elira froze. Is it? He nodded slowly. Gorvath. Smaller one, maybe a juvenile. The defense team was still far behind. There was no time to call for help. Daniel whispered, "Stay low." The creature broke through the trees, dark scales glistening, teeth bared. It moved on 6 legs, muscles rippling under its skin. Elira's heart pounded as she watched Daniel reach for a metal rod from his pack. He didn't back away. The Gorvath lunged, roaring. Daniel dodged, rolling aside and striking its leg with the rod. Sparks flew. The beast howled, swiping its tail. Daniel was quick. He climbed a nearby rock, waving the flaming branch he'd taken from the fire. The creature stopped, confused by the light. Daniel shouted, "Back off!" His voice echoed through the trees. Elira felt both fear and admiration. He wasn't just fighting. He was teaching the creature boundaries. He used the flame not to kill, but to guide. The Gorvath snarled, then slowly backed away, disappearing into the thick jungle. When silence returned, Elira exhaled shakily. "How did you do that?" Daniel jumped down, smiling. It wasn't hungry, just curious. Sometimes you don't need to fight. You just need to convince them it's not worth it. She stared at him. "You could have died." He shrugged again. "Could have. But that's life. You can't learn anything if you hide from it." As they made their way back to camp, Elira felt a new sense of understanding. Her people had always believed safety was found in walls and machines. But this human found safety in courage and awareness. That night, while writing her report, she couldn't stop thinking about him. She wrote slowly and carefully. Human strength does not come from weapons or power. It comes from will, the refusal to surrender even when logic says it's hopeless. The next morning, she was called to present her findings to the High Council through a hollow connection. The alien leaders appeared as shimmering blue figures, their voices calm but cold. "Dr. Elira," the elder said, "your reports speak highly of this human. Yet his behavior seems dangerous. Do you suggest we study or isolate him?" She looked at the holograms, her voice steady. "Neither. We should learn from him." The room went silent. "Learn?" the elder repeated. "Yes," Elira said. "He doesn't fear nature and he respects it. He adapts faster than we can predict. If he can survive on Vorlax 9, perhaps he can teach us how to face our fears, not just hide from them." After a long pause, the council leader said, "Continue observing, but remember, Doctor, curiosity can be dangerous." When the call ended, Elira stood by the window, watching Daniel outside as he trained the soldiers how to read tracks and set traps. They laughed, they listened, and even the toughest among them began to follow his advice. She smiled quietly. The man who had once been seen as reckless was now becoming their guide. In her heart, Elira knew something had changed forever, not just in her research, but in the way she saw humanity. They were not fragile. They were not foolish. They were fearless learners, and Daniel Rourke had just shown her what it truly meant to be alive. Weeks passed, and the story of Captain Daniel Rourke spread far beyond the jungle base. Across the colonies and research outposts of Vorlax 9, whispers followed his name. The human who ate the Gorvath. Some said he was reckless. Others said he was lucky. But those who had seen him with their own eyes knew the truth. He was something rare. He was fearless in a world where fear ruled every heart. For Dr. Elira, those weeks felt like a quiet transformation. Every day she spent with Daniel changed how she saw the universe. She had been trained to trust logic, numbers, and safety protocols. But Daniel lived by something simpler: instinct, heart, and courage. It was strange for her to admit, but she was learning from him. Early one morning, dark clouds rolled over the jungle. The wind howled, shaking the metal walls of the base. The planet's tropical storms were violent and unpredictable, capable of destroying buildings and uprooting trees. The command tower blared with alarms as the communication officer shouted, "Main generators failing. Power grid at 60%. Daniel appeared in the control room, soaked from the rain but calm as ever. "What's the damage?" "The storm knocked out the western grid," Elira said quickly. "We're losing energy shields. The perimeter defenses will fail within an hour." Outside, lightning cracked across the sky. Rain poured down in heavy sheets. The thick forest that had always seemed alive now looked wild and angry. The commander shouted, "Everyone inside the safe chamber. We can't risk exposure if the Gorvats come out. Elira froze. Gorvats? They hunt during storms? Daniel nodded slowly. Bad weather drives them from the lowlands. They follow sound and light, and we've got plenty of both. The commander turned to him. We'll shelter in place. Daniel shook his head. That's suicide. You trap yourself in a cage, they'll tear through it. You need to make the camp look like a place not worth hunting. The aliens looked confused. What does that mean? It means, Daniel said, you make yourself the bigger predator. Before anyone could stop him, he began issuing orders. Turn off all non-essential power. Kill the bright lights. Activate the outer fires. Elira hesitated but trusted him. Do as he says, she told the crew. He's faced them before. The lights dimmed. The camp sank into a red glow from emergency lamps and burning fuel pits Daniel had arranged outside. He walked through the storm with a torch in hand, checking the barriers himself. Elira ran after him. You're going out there in this weather? He looked back at her with a grin. If I don't, who will? Rain beat against them like stones. The torches hissed, their flames struggling to stay alive. Daniel pushed through the mud, setting up a line of fire trenches he had dug earlier. Fire! He shouted over the wind. Isn't just warmth, it's a message. It tells every creature that this territory already belongs to someone dangerous. Elira followed his lead, helping to ignite the soaked branches. The orange glow grew brighter against the storm-dark sky. Lightning flashed, and in that moment she saw movement in the trees, tall shadows shifting between trunks. Her heart pounded. They're here! Daniel's eyes narrowed. Yeah, they always come when you're not ready. From the jungle came the low, thunderous growl of a Gorvath pack. Not one, several. Their glowing red eyes appeared in the rain like embers. Inside the base, soldiers raised their energy rifles, but Daniel shouted, Don't shoot unless they cross the flame line. Let them see the fire first. The creatures moved closer, circling, testing. The smell of wet ash filled the air. One of them roared, shaking the ground. Daniel turned to Elira. They're testing our fear. They can smell it, she swallowed hard. How do we make them stop? He stared at the fire, by showing them we're not prey. Without hesitation, Daniel grabbed a broken metal pole, dipped it into the flames, and raised it high. The lightning flashed again, illuminating him. One small figure standing against monsters 3 times his size. Elira felt something powerful stir in her chest. Not just fear, but awe. The lead Gorvath stepped forward, its breath steaming through the rain. Daniel stood his ground. Come on then, he said quietly. The creature roared and lunged forward, but as it neared the fire, the heat and light forced it to turn. Daniel threw the burning pole and the flames burst across the wet ground. The beast stumbled back, hissing. Now, he shouted. Elira triggered the fuel lines. The entire front trench ignited, a wall of fire slicing through the storm. The Gorvaths howled, confused and furious. The soldiers cheered inside the base, but Daniel wasn't finished. They'll try to flank us. Watch the east ridge. He sprinted through the rain, boots sliding in mud, while Elira and the others followed. Another Gorvath appeared, crashing through the trees. Daniel aimed his flare gun and fired into the air. The burst of red light exploded above them, bright as a second sun. The creature froze, blinded, before turning and vanishing into the dark. For nearly an hour, the battle between fire and storm continued. Daniel's quick thinking turned chaos into control. He directed everyone, placing fuel canisters, shouting orders, keeping their courage alive. By dawn, the storm finally began to fade. Smoke rose from the wet ground and the smell of burned wood filled the air. The Gorvaths were gone. Elira stood at the edge of the camp, drenched and trembling. Around her, the soldiers looked exhausted but safe. Daniel sat on a crate, breathing heavily, watching the sunrise. You did it, she said quietly. He looked up, his face streaked with rain and soot. We did it, he corrected her. For the first time, Elira realized he didn't think of himself as a hero. To him, survival wasn't glory. It was teamwork, instinct, and courage shared. Later that day, as the cleanup began, Elira reviewed the data logs. The sensors had recorded the Gorvath pack retreating faster than ever observed. It wasn't fear of weapons, it was fear of humans. Fear of the one creature that refused to run. She went to Daniel, who was cleaning his gear. You changed how they see us, she said. He smiled faintly. Nah. I just reminded them that even the biggest predator can be scared of something smaller, if that smaller thing stands its ground. Elira looked at him for a long moment. You risked your life for a group that barely knew you? He shrugged. That's what humans do. We've always survived by protecting each other. That night, as the camp rested, Elira wrote her most important report yet. Captain Daniel Rourke demonstrated an ability beyond physical strength. He has an emotional understanding of survival, one based on courage and connection. His behavior influenced not only the Gorvaths, but also the minds of every species who witnessed it. He turned fear into unity. When she finished writing, she stepped outside. The air was calm now, the jungle quiet. The fire trenches still glowed faintly like lines of light guarding their small camp. Daniel stood there looking out at the trees. She joined him, standing silently beside him. Do you ever get tired of this? She asked. He smiled softly. No, fear keeps me awake. Courage keeps me moving. It's a fair trade. Elira looked up at the stars, remembering her people's old saying, only the strongest survive. But she now understood something new. Strength wasn't just power. It was the will to stand when others fall. Daniel turned to her, his expression calm. You know, he said quietly, the Gorvath aren't evil. They just do what nature tells them. The difference is we get to choose what kind of creatures we want to be. She nodded slowly. And what kind are you? He looked back toward the dark forest where the beasts had vanished. One that doesn't give up. Elira smiled faintly. Maybe that's what makes humans the real apex predators. Daniel chuckled. Nah, we're just stubborn animals with a fire in our hearts. The night wind passed softly through the trees, carrying the faint scent of smoke and rain. In that quiet moment, Elira knew she would never see the universe the same way again. This fragile, fearless human had not only faced the planet's monsters, he had changed what it meant to be alive on Vorlax 9. Months passed since that stormy night when Captain Daniel Rourke stood against a pack of Gorvaths and saved everyone at the research base. The jungle had grown quiet again, but something in the hearts of those who lived on Vorlax 9 had changed forever. The alien scientists no longer spoke of humans as fragile. They spoke of them with respect, even admiration. And at the center of every conversation was one man, the human who had eaten the planet's apex predator and lived to tell the tale. For Dr. Elira, those months felt like living inside a new story of discovery. She had arrived on this planet as a scientist who studied creatures. Now she was studying something far deeper, the courage that lived inside humanity. Daniel had become more than just a survivor to her. He was a living reminder that strength didn't always come from power. Sometimes it came from spirit. Every morning, Elira found Daniel walking near the jungle edge, his boots muddy and his clothes still patched from his crash. He had repaired parts of his shuttle, but he never hurried to leave. He said he wanted to listen to the planet a little longer. Strange place, he told her one morning as the sun rose over the glowing canopy. Everything here wants to kill you, but it's beautiful anyway. She smiled softly. You describe it the same way I would describe you. Daniel laughed, shaking his head. I'll take that as a compliment. Over time, Elira noticed that Daniel's attitude had changed the base itself. Soldiers who once feared the jungle now trained outside it. Scientists who once stayed inside labs now explored under the open sky. He had awakened something in them, a kind of bravery that her people had forgotten long ago. One evening, the base received a transmission from the Galactic Council. The message was clear. A transport ship was coming to retrieve Captain Rourke. His mission was complete, and his survival data had already become famous across the systems. The story of the human predator had reached even the highest governments. When Elira heard the news, her heart tightened. She should have felt relief that he was finally going home, but instead, she felt an ache she didn't expect. That night, she found him sitting alone by the campfire, staring into the flames. The air smelled of wet earth and wood smoke. Firelight painted his face in shades of gold and orange. So, she said quietly, taking a seat beside him, you're leaving. He nodded slowly. Looks like it. They want me to report back, tell them what I learned. Elira looked into the flames. And what will you tell them? He smiled faintly. That the universe is bigger and stranger than they think. That there are creatures out there stronger than us. But none of them can match our stubbornness. She laughed softly. You call stubbornness a strength? He poked the fire with a stick. It kept me alive. When everything says give up, humans keep walking. Maybe that's our secret. For a while they sat in silence, listening to the distant calls of the jungle. Then Illyra spoke again, her voice gentle. Before you came here, no one believed courage could be studied. We thought it was just an emotion, but you showed us it's a choice. Daniel looked at her. Courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being scared and moving anyway. Her eyes softened. You've changed how we see fear. He chuckled. Good. Then maybe I did something useful. The next morning, the transport ship arrived through the gray clouds, its engines shaking the air. Soldiers gathered to say goodbye. Some saluted him, others simply nodded with quiet respect. For them, Daniel was no longer a visitor. He was the one who had shown them how to face the wild heart of Vorlax 9. Illyra walked beside him to the landing pad. Do you ever regret coming here? She asked. Not for a second, he said. I came to explore a planet, but I ended up learning more about life. She smiled sadly. You'll be remembered here for generations. He looked thoughtful. Maybe, but I hope they remember why. Not because I killed something big, but because I showed them that fear doesn't have to win. When the ship's doors opened, Daniel paused. He reached into his pocket and handed Illyra a small piece of dark-scaled material, the last fragment of the Gorvath he had defeated months ago. Keep this, he said. You told me once that you collect specimens for study. Consider this a different kind of specimen, proof that even the strongest can fall when someone refuses to quit. Illyra held the piece gently, her voice soft. And what will you take with you? He smiled. A memory of a world that tried to scare me and failed. The engines roared, blowing dust and leaves into the air. The crew signaled for departure. Daniel stepped inside the ship, then turned back one last time. Take care of this place, Doc. Keep the fire burning. As the doors closed, Illyra felt her throat tighten. The ship lifted off, rising through the mist until it became a silver dot in the sky. She stood there for a long time, watching the clouds fade. The jungle was quiet again, but something deep inside her had changed. The fire Daniel had taught her to make still burned in her heart. That evening, she sat alone at her desk, writing her final research entry. The human species cannot be measured by strength, size, or intelligence alone. Their true power lies in will. They adapt not only to survive but to grow. They do not fear the unknown, they challenge it. When the Gorvath fell, it was not because of a weapon, but because of a human spirit that refused to bow. She paused, then added a final line. Perhaps humanity's greatest secret is that they do not conquer fear, they consume it. Weeks later, Illyra's report became a scientific sensation. The phrase "the predator that ate fear" spread through research academies and media networks across the galaxy. It changed how countless civilizations saw humans. No longer were they seen as fragile wanderers. They were respected as the species that could face any world and make it home. Back on Vorlax 9, the jungle still roared at night, but the creatures no longer came near the base. The Gorvath stayed in the deep forests, away from the lights of fire and the scent of smoke. It was as if even nature remembered the day it was challenged by a being smaller but fiercer. One evening, Illyra walked alone to the same clearing where she had first seen Daniel sitting beside his campfire. The old ashes were still there, faint traces of black and gray in the dirt. She knelt, touching the ground gently. A warm wind passed through the trees, carrying the soft hum of life. She closed her eyes and whispered, "You taught us well, human." In her mind, she could almost hear his voice again. Steady, calm, with that teasing humor he always carried. Sometimes you don't need to be the strongest, Doc, just the one who doesn't quit. Illyra smiled through quiet tears. She stood looking toward the distant mountains where the sun was setting. The sky burned orange and gold, the same color as his fire. She turned back toward the base, ready to continue her work. The story of Daniel Rourke would live on, not as a myth or legend, but as a lesson written into the history of her people. A lesson that reminded every living being, no matter what world they came from, that courage is the light that keeps the darkness away. Before heading inside, she looked once more at the horizon and whispered the words she had written at the end of her report. Humans are not born predators. They become one when fear dares them to stop. As night settled over Vorlax 9, the jungle sang again, alive and free. And somewhere beyond the stars, a lone human explorer looked down from his ship window, smiling at the memory of the blue-skinned scientist and the wild planet that had once tried to frighten him, only to be tamed by his fire. The legend of the human who feasted on the apex predator had become something greater, a story of spirit, survival, and the unbreakable heart of humanity.